Hey everyone, and welcome back to AI Paper Podcasts. Today we are diving into a paper all about solo role-playing games, but powered by AI. Imagine playing D&D by yourself, but you've got this AI game master, and it's creating this super immersive and engaging experience. That's what the researchers behind ChatRPG set out to do. Their paper is called Static V's Agentic Game Master AI for Facilitating Solo Role-Playing Experiences. Now, this paper is packed with technical details. We are going to unpack it all, make sure you walk away understanding their approach and the results they achieved.
Absolutely. And for those of you tuning in for the short form edit, here's the gist. This paper explores building an AI game master, specifically for solo role-playing. The researchers actually designed and evaluated two different versions, a simpler V1 that used basic prompt engineering, and a more advanced V2. This one leveraged a multi-agent system. It was powered by the React framework. What they found in their user studies was that V2 offered a significantly superior experience. It was more immersive, more engaging, and way more realistic. So the key takeaway is that this React framework, which combines reasoning and actions within LLMs, holds immense potential for crafting compelling AI-powered interactive narratives.
Okay, that was a great summary. Now let's dive deep. To really understand the brilliance of this research, we need to talk about interactive fiction. You remember those choose-your-own-adventure books, right? Every choice led you down a different path. That's interactive fiction. Or IF.
Right. And IF has evolved so much since then. Think about classic text-based games like Zork. They took IF to a whole new level. But then, tabletop role-playing games like D&D came along. They brought in a human element, the Dungeon Master, that brought this level of dynamism and unpredictability. Those earlier forms of IF just couldn't match that.
And that's the challenge that this research tackles. How do you recreate that D&D magic, that sense of a truly organic and unpredictable story unfolding for someone playing solo?
Well, they started with ChatRPG version 1. It relied on prompt engineering. Think of it like giving the LLM a specific set of instructions, almost like a recipe, on how to respond to different player actions in the game. In V1, they fed the LLM info about the game's rules, the setting, and some basic guidelines for generating responses. It had this game input handler to process the player's typed commands, and then a game state manager to keep track of the game's progress.
I'm guessing the simpler approach had some limitations.
Exactly. As the game went on, maintaining narrative coherence became a real challenge. The AI struggled to remember details from earlier, so it led to a story that felt disjointed, and sometimes even illogical. It just couldn't grasp those intricacies of long-term storytelling like a human DM could.
Okay, so that's where version 2 comes in. This is where things get interesting. For V2, they moved to a multi-agent system with not one, but two LLMs working together. It's like having a dungeon master and an assistant.
Exactly. They had two distinct agents, the narrator and the archivist. The narrator, you can probably guess, is focused on crafting those captivating narrative responses to the player's actions.
And the archivist is like the game's memory bank.
Yeah.
Making sure all the details are there and the world is consistent.
Yes. The archivist is constantly updating and managing the game state, so it keeps track of character stats, inventory items, locations the player has visited, any changes that happen because of the player.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But what ties these two agents together? What gives them that intelligence to make decisions? That's the React framework, right?
Absolutely. React is the secret sauce. It empowers both the narrator and the archivist to reason and act within the game world. It mimics human decision-making. Imagine you're playing chess. You think about your opponent's moves. You make your move. You see their reaction, and then you plan your next move based on that. That's essentially what the React framework allows the AI to do.
So it's not just reacting to what the player does. It's thinking about those actions and making decisions based on the rules.
Exactly. It's a thought-action-observation cycle. It continuously loops, allowing the AI to learn and adapt as the game progresses.
Now, I want to hear about the tools these agents use. Let's start with the narrator. What does it use to create immersive story moments?
The narrator has a set of tools designed for narrative generation, for example. It's got a wound character tool to simulate injuries during combat, a heal character tool for healing actions, and a battle tool to handle combat scenarios.
So if I'm playing and I say, I swing my sword at the goblin, how would the narrator use these tools?
Okay, so the narrator would analyze that input and think, okay, this is combat, time to use the battle tool. Then it would look at your character stats, the goblin's stats, maybe even details about where you're fighting. Then the tool would figure out if your attack hits, how much damage you do, any other consequences.
So the narrator is deciding the outcome of the fight based on the rule.
Exactly. And then it crafts a descriptive response. based on what happened in the battle. It might say something like, your sword connects with the goblin's arm. It shrieks in pain and clutches its wound, but it's still standing. Get ready for its counterattack.
Wow. That's so much better than just you hit the goblin.
Ooh.
I can see how that would make the game feel more real.
Right, and it's not just about describing the action. The narrator also has this memory component. It can remember things that happened earlier and use them in its responses.
So it can refer back to things, creating a sense of continuity.
Exactly. It's all about creating that feeling of a dynamic story.
Where every action matters.
Yes.
And the story changes based on your choices. Okay, this is starting to make sense. We had the narrator making the story, and the archivist keeping track of all the details. But how does this work in a real game? Can you give us an example of how these agents use the React framework?
Sure. Let's say you're exploring a library and you find this hidden compartment, and there's a scroll in it. You tell the AI, I carefully unroll the scroll and try to decipher the strange symbols.
Okay, what happens next? Does this start the React cycle in the AI?
Yeah, so the narrator looks at your action and it starts reasoning. It thinks, okay, the player's looking at a scroll. This could be them trying to learn something. Maybe it's written in some ancient language, or it's got a magic inscription.
So it's not just reacting, it's trying to understand what you're doing.
Right. So based on that reasoning, the narrator decides to use a tool. Let's call it the Decipher Script tool. It gives the tool information about the scroll, like what it looks like, the symbols, and any details from the game's lore. The tool processes the information and gives a result. Maybe it says, the scroll has a message on it. It's written in an ancient Elvish dialect. If you study it carefully, you might be able to translate it.
So the narrator thought that you needed to figure out the scroll. So it took the action of using that Decipher Script tool, and then it got the result back from the tool.
Exactly. That's the thought action observation cycle. And now the narrator uses this result to give you a response, it might say. As you look at the scroll, you see some symbols. You remember they're from an ancient Elvish dialect. You start to remember your language training, and you feel determined. Maybe if you focus, you can figure out the secrets of the scroll.
Wow. It really feels like the AI is responding to my actions.
Yeah.
But what about the archivist? What's it doing?
The archivist is watching all of this and updating the game. When it sees that the narrator used the Decipher Script tool, it knows, okay, the player has a new quest to translate the scroll. So it uses its own tool, maybe called Update Quest Log, to add this quest to your list. It might also update the game to show that you have the scroll and to store information about it.
So the archivist makes sure that what you do in the game is saved in the game's data,
Exactly. It's like a record keeper.
making sure everything is consistent
Yeah.
and up to date.
Exactly. This back and forth between the narrator and the archivist is what makes version 2 so much better than version 1. It's not just reacting to the player, it's thinking about the world, making decisions, and updating the game in a way that feels more human.
You said earlier that they first tried using one agent, but it wasn't good. Why did they split it into two agents?
Well, as they worked on it more, they realized that making good stories and managing all the details of the game are two different things. It's like trying to write a book and update a spreadsheet at the same time.
It's
too much for one agent. It makes sense to divide the work and let each agent focus on what they're good at. It's kind of like a real dungeon master. One person focuses on telling the story and keeping the players engaged, and someone else manages the rules and stats.
So using two agents makes things more efficient.
Yeah.
And it creates a better game.
Exactly.
So let's talk about the user study. You said players liked version 2 a lot more. What did they like about it?
The feedback was really good. Players said that version 2 was more responsive and adaptable. They felt like it understood them better and reacted to them in a smarter way. They especially liked the combat. Instead of just saying, you hit the monster, the AI would describe the fight in detail, like the swords hitting, and how the player and monster reacted.
I can see how that would make the game more exciting. Did players say anything about the story itself? Or how believable the world was?
Yeah, they said the stories in version 2 were better and more immersive. They liked how the AI would remember things from before. It made the world feel more real.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
It sounds like this multi-agent approach with React is a big deal for interactive storytelling. But were there any downsides? Did anyone like version 1 better?
It's interesting. Some players actually liked version 1 better. They liked the slower pace and the long descriptions,
Right.
where the AI would just tell the story, and they didn't have to make as many decisions.
So version 1 was simpler.
Right. But it still worked for some players.
It sounds like it depends on what kind of player you are.
Yeah. It's about finding a balance between giving the player control and controlling the story, and having options for different kinds of players. But most players liked the dynamic and immersive experience of version 2 more.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, the paper also talked about some of the problems with using LLMs for this kind of game development. One that I noticed was the limitations of the OpenAI API's content filters.
Right. OpenAI and most other LLM providers have content filters to keep the models from making bad or offensive content, but sometimes these filters are too strict, especially for a game that might have violence or fantasy creatures.
So you're saying, if I'm fighting a dragon, the AI might censor it because it thinks it's too violent.
It could happen. It's tough to balance creative freedom with responsible AI use, the researchers thought, that using a private LLM without these filters might be better in the future.
That makes sense, especially if you want to give developers more control so they can tailor the game to their audience. But this whole thing about React and multi-agent systems, it makes me think building these AI game masters must be super complicated. What were some of the hardest parts for the researchers?
One of the hardest things was writing the React prompts, these prompts, along with the tool descriptions, control how the AI behaves. And they can change a lot, based on even small changes in the wording. It's like trying to explain how to run a D&D game to someone who's never played before, but you have to explain it so a computer can understand.
That sounds really hard.
It is. You need to really understand the game and how LLMs work. The researchers found that using few-shot prompting helped a lot. That's where you give the AI a few examples of how to use a tool. It's like showing the AI how to do something before asking it to do it itself.
So you can't just say, here's a tool, use it. You have to show the AI how to use it.
Right. This careful prompt engineering is going to be super important for building AI systems that can really understand storytelling and game mastering.
This has been really interesting. But before we move on, I have one more question about the study. Were there any problems with how they did it that might have affected the results?
Well, there are always limitations with research in this study. They only had 12 people participate. That's not a lot. If they had more people, they might have seen even stronger results. Also, the study was based on players choosing which version they liked better. Sometimes they said both versions were the same, so it's hard to say for sure which features were better.
So maybe there are differences between the versions that the study didn't find.
Yeah, but even with those limitations, the results are still good. Most players liked version 2 a lot more, and they gave good feedback. So it seems like this multi-agent approach with React is a really promising way to make immersive and engaging AI-powered games.
This has been a fascinating look at AI and gaming. Before we move on to the last part, are there any other key takeaways you want to mention?
For me, I think the biggest takeaway is how this research changes what's possible in storytelling. We're going beyond just picking from choices. Now AI can make stories that react to us and surprise us.
I totally agree. And it's not about replacing human storytellers. It's about making storytelling even better. Imagine AI working with writers and game designers, combining human creativity with AI to create really unique experiences.
Now that's a future I'm excited for. Speaking of the future, what are some promising directions for research in this area? What's next?
The researchers have some big goals. One thing they're working on is better narrative adherence. That means making sure the AI doesn't just let the player do anything, but instead, it guides the story in a way that makes sense. So it's about finding that balance between letting the player do what they want and keeping the story going in the right direction.
Exactly. They're also trying to make the game easier to use by adding speech to text and text to speech. Imagine talking to your AI game master and hearing it respond in different voices for each character. It would be like having a real dungeon master right there.
That'd be awesome.
And that's not all. They're even looking at effective computing. That means the AI could understand your emotions and change the story based on how you feel. If you're scared, the game could get scarier. If you're happy after winning a fight, the AI can make things more celebratory. It's about making the experience personal.
That's amazing.
And lastly, they want to add multimedia to the game, like the AI making pictures, sound effects, or even short videos to go along with the story. It would be a cinematic experience.
Wow.
It's a really exciting time for AI and entertainment.
Okay, so before we go, where can people learn more about this research and maybe even try out ChatRPG?
The paper is called Static V's Agentic Game Master AI for Facilitating Solo Role-Playing Experiences. You should read it if you want to learn more. The researchers also shared their code, so you can check that out too. We'll put links in the description.
Great. Thanks for taking us through this.
You're welcome.
And to everyone watching, thanks for joining us. Check out the links in the description. And if you like this, like and subscribe so you don't miss out on the latest in AI and tech. Until next time, Keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those imaginations going.